Joel Went here. This is the 15th blog on my video blog, political blogs, and a sad story. I mean, most everyone knows, it's paying attention, that the Supreme Court ruled today, or this last week, and basically made it okay for corporations and large labor associations to spend all the money that they wanted on political campaigns without any limits. Now, a lot of people think this is okay and are happy, and of course 5 justices on the Supreme Court thought it was okay, but the fact is that basically this is like the end of the Republic. There's a story that goes that when Ben Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention, the first thing he said to the people waiting outside was, "Well, you've got your republic if you can keep it." And even then people knew that the banks were going to be a problem. They also knew that the wealthy were very much a race apart in a way. Lincoln knew the banks were a problem, and the situation had got worse by then. I'm not going to go into why the banks were a problem, maybe later. That's sort of real obvious to everybody. Anyway, in the 20th century, the efforts to sort of give more and more control to the banks and less control to the American people escalated when the Federal Reserve was created. And of course we saw the result eventually of those efforts for the banks to be independent of any government oversight at all. Even that put in place as a result of the Depression. In the 80s that was all removed, and the Democrats and the Republicans both colluded in getting rid of those restraints. And we've seen the results of that now. Now, one of the things I didn't realize, although it was a factual realization, I sort of assumed things like that were going on in the background. But a couple of weeks ago I read a story that there actually had been formed in the 70s a conglomeration of lawyers that worked for corporations whose express effort was to bring about in the law those kinds of decisions which would result in giving corporations as much freedom as possible. And one of the ways, of course, to do that was to continue with the idea that had been launched almost 100 years ago, that a corporation could be considered a person. Now, this is ridiculous on its face. Why the Supreme Court continued to have this can only be a sign of their corruption and the fact that they really don't understand the Republic at all. This is really strange when you consider that the conservatives have always had this idea of original intent, or various ways of trying to confine the Constitution to what the founders thought. For clearly the founders never thought that the corporation was a person. But in any event, with this last decision, this has been made about as wide open as possible. A corporation is a person. And being a citizen, there are a whole class of citizens far and above ordinary citizens. You just think about it. How the court could ever consider that the founders and the writers of the first 10 amendments would have meant to give corporations the same rights of free speech as a human being is just silly. At its worst, it's insane. It represents a kind of legal insanity, and in fact, from a certain point of view, you could say it's one of the signs of the end of Western civilization, which we've talked a little bit about before. In this case, it's the inability of the law to be living and in its rigidification and in its old age and its process of sclerotic descent into death, it has basically managed to kill the republic. There's no more republic anymore at all, because there's no real way in which we the people can affect what goes on in public life. Those days were pretty close to being over, and with this decision this last week, they are over. Now, what does this mean? Well, we could get all teary-eyed and go, oh my, oh my, oh my. But the fact is that this process has been in place a long time. It's been in place since Ben Franklin noticed that the republic was fragile. We're stuck with a situation which was sort of naturally going to happen anyway. In my little booklet on common sense, I talk about the degeneration as being a natural process, which of course has turned a corner. But where does that put us? What the heck do we do? Well, we do something relatively simple in a way in which a lot of people are going to say we're not going to be able to do it. But I'm going to hopefully in the future provide arguments which basically say not only can we do it and can we legally do it, but it's really our own hope if we want to give rebirth to the republic, which has just recently died. And of course, because we're looking at social processes, we're looking at dying and becoming, and we're looking at things that metamorphose. So we could say in a way that even though the republic is pretty much dead, given what the Supreme Court just recently did, there's also a metamorphic process going on. Oddly enough, this metamorphic process includes such people as the tea baggers. Conservatives have a lot to complain about. They're not particularly well led in some degrees, but they've got legitimate complaints. They look at government and they think government is a piece of crap, and they're pretty much right. We talked about this earlier. Government is broken. It doesn't work. Well, what are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to write a new constitution. In my writings you can get the details of why we can do that, but let's cover that a little bit real quick. And I'll come back to it later. First of all, we can write a new constitution because we wrote the original constitution. That's why it says we the people at the beginning. It doesn't say we the appointed custodians of certain legislative bodies that sent us to have this conference. Which in fact wasn't meant to create a constitution in the way that it did, but it was an act by some gentlemen who understood that there was a mood in the country for the creation of a founding document. They went ahead and did it, and of course over a decade or so that was approved. So that's we the people. We did it once before, we can do it again. If there's any doubt about that, look at the 9th and 10th Amendment, particularly the 10th. The reserve clause, which says all powers not enumerated in this Constitution are reserved respectively for the states and for the citizen, which means the power to create a new Constitution. Since it's not enumerated, it's enumerated how to amend one, but it doesn't say you can't create a new one. That power resides in us. And that's going to be the sanest and safest way that we can deal with the situation, is to get our acts together and create a new Constitution. But to do that, we've got to be really, really, really thoughtful and careful.